So what you're looking at now is the pattern editor in Studio One. Go ahead and stop that. And patterns are a great way to sequence, obviously, drums and percussion, but we can also do the same thing with melodic sources like synthesizers and pianos and things like that. So in this video, we're going to check out our patterns, see how to use them, see how to set them up, go through our variations, and go through all of these tools here. So let's start from the very beginning so you know how to actually insert this on a track. And for now, let me just get rid of all of this. So right now I have Impact XT on a track. And I know most of the videos that you see showing patterns, they're also using Impact XT, but fear not, patterns will also work with other drum virtual instruments as well, which we'll see towards the end. But right now we have Impact XT loaded up, a bunch of different samples in here. Okay. So if I just double click here, that's going to give me a part, what's known as a part, which is essentially a container for MIDI. If I come down here to edit, you can see we have essentially our piano roll, although it's focused around our drum mode. Okay, so there is a drum mode for our parts here in Studio One as well. Okay, so our drum editor here is not the same thing. If I go to put some hits in there, it's not the same thing as our patterns, but just be aware that there is a drum editor here in Studio One as well. So we're going to delete this actually, because what we want is a pattern. So let's come up here to Event and we'll go to Insert Pattern, or we can use Control-Shift-P. Also, if I already had something on the track, I could right click and choose Insert Pattern here as well. So now that we have our pattern, we can resize it if we want, but let's just leave it to the default for now. And I can double click on it to open up our pattern, or just, of course, select it and open up our edit mode. Now in our pattern view here, we can resize it. We can undock it. So then I could put this on a different screen if I wanted to. I can, of course, redock it here as well. And the way this works, it's essentially a step sequencer. We can also program different variations, all contained within one sort of a master pattern. If you've ever used FL Studio, you'll probably understand patterns pretty well. And by the way, if you've only used DAWs like Pro Tools, we have a video on this channel showing the basics of understanding how FL Studio works if you want to go check that out as well. But here in our pattern view, if I hide the inspector, we're not going to see this over there. So let's go ahead and open this up. So in our pattern editor, we have a bunch of tools up here across the top. We, of course, have the number of steps. Just change this to whatever you want. Okay. We have the resolution, which you can change freely there. We have swing, gate, and accent. We'll look at those later. We have step input. We have a way to input notes really quickly. So if I want my kick, boom, I can just Control Z out of that. Maybe just fill all of these here. I can do that. I can, if I have something in here, I can shift it over or shift it over. Okay. We can do all of that right within here. We can click a note to erase it. We can, of course, click notes to fill them in. Click it again to erase it. So it's your basic step sequencer, but there are some hidden features in here that we'll get into in just a second. So let's go ahead and fill out our kick. Now, just so you understand, whenever I trigger the kick here, it's of course triggering right here. If I trigger the rim, it's triggering the rim. So as you can see over here in the sidebar, it's actually exposing to me all of my different instruments here. In this case, my kick, my snare, my clap, and they're named properly, which of course is very helpful whenever you're programming beats, because versus something like a piano roll where we're only seeing note names, we don't know exactly, what we're doing here. So back over to our drum view. Let's close this down. We don't need it. So to fill something in, just click it. We'll just start filling this in here. You can see up here in my pattern exactly what happened when I did that. You can see it reflected in the pattern. As I delete those, they are deleted from our pattern. You go ahead and name this. I'm just going to call it drums. So let me turn on my loop there and we'll just play that back. Of course, we get that trigger there. Now I can fill in my snare. Maybe here, and okay, so just very basic, right? Let me actually get rid of that note there. Get rid of that one. Okay, so this is one pattern that we have. As you can see, it's right there. Let's go ahead and create a variation of this pattern. So in order to do that, we can use this button right here, which is duplicate variation. If you just want a blank variation, just hit the plus, and that gives me an empty pattern to work with right here. But I don't want that. Let me get rid of it. I want a duplicate. So now I can work on this duplicated version here. I can go and name this whatever I want. We'll just call it drums 2. So now I have the same exact pattern here. Let's say we want to put in some hi-hat. Click and drag if I want, across that. Okay, so that's very simple. I know, I understand that, but in order to see how this works, we can see now that our pattern right here is playing drums 2. Now, if I wanted to play drums 1 in this position, that's okay. I can click this down arrow right here and just select drums 1. It's going to switch it over. I can also select it down here with our inspector open. I can just select our drums 2, and that will switch it as well. So once you go about creating your patterns, your master pattern, and then all of the variations, you can of course just select them in a few different ways here and place them around the sequence here. So if I want the drums 2 right here, I can just click and drag it and put it right there. I could also, I'm just going to hold down Alt and make a copy of this, drag it out. I can then switch this one here to 1. And now we're building up our sequence in our DAW. Right, really simple, but then it goes right to 2, right? Now, if I change something here on drums 1, that's going to be reflected across all of the patterns that are linked to drum 1. So if we put another kick right here, guess what? You saw that added right there on both of these different clips. Okay, so if you wanted that to happen and you didn't want to mess up your drums 1 variation, go ahead and just duplicate that first and then put that in there. So you have different variations to pick from. So you can see here, drums 1 is still, how we had it. And now this one called variations 1, which is drums 3. Let's go ahead and name it drums 3, has that different hit, that different kick in there. Okay, let's come back here to drums 1. And we'll just focus on this one here and look at some of our other options that we have. So I can change my steps, maybe change it to 8 steps. So you can see what happened up here. It's still playing the same exact sequence, even though we cut our steps in half. And that's because, we basically had this sequence doubled anyway, once we had it on 16, right? So we just cut that in half, but up here, because this is long enough to fill our entire bar, right? It's still playing the exact same sequence, right? It's just repeating within the pattern. So if I put pattern 1 right there, now you can see that it's just that portion there, right? But if I expand it, that just gets repeated over and over and over, right? So let's put this back to say 16, maybe take it up to 32. Now you can see what happens right here. A little bit different now. Now, because our pattern is long enough and we haven't filled in the rest of our steps, of course, there's empty space in our pattern, right? So we'd have to actually fill this in since our pattern is long enough in this case. But again, if it was down here, then it's just going to repeat what we have here. So let's put this back on 16. And what about our resolution? So we can change, let's come back here to pattern 1, change our resolution. It's on 1/16 right now. If I change this to 1/4, you can see what happened up here. Because our pattern now in our sequencer isn't long enough to actually play all of these steps. You can see it's just repeating. It's just going up to 4 and then repeating these 2 steps here. If on the other hand, it was longer, you can see what happens right there. Same thing if I went, let's go faster, 1/32. You can see that ended up doubling things here in our actual pattern. And change this to 8, 12. Okay. We can also change our resolution and our steps per lane. So if I want my kick to have, I don't know, let's just say 4 steps, I can do that. You can see it shrunk down, and it also changed here in our pattern. But you still hear that kick, right? Because you can see this little gray box shuffling around, right, as it continues on here for the rest of our sequence for our other lanes. So you can always change things up per lane, right? Which is pretty cool that you can do that. I can change this here to 8 if I want. So it's only going to cycle around these 8 steps. I can also change the resolution per lane. So if I want to change this to 1/32, which is our hi-hat, I'll just change this to, let's say 1/32 dotted. We can do that. Kind of cool. Just cycling around that. Change it to 1/4. Now in this case, it goes too long, so it's just going to cycle around after our 16 steps. But a lot of cool stuff you can do in here. Let me put this on 1/32 straight. All right. Put this back to 1/16 and put this back on 16 steps. So play around with this. You can get a lot of cool different beats out of changing up your resolution per lane. And if you know anything about FXpansion's trimmer, this works in a very similar way. Let me get rid of these notes here. So of course we also have swing, which I'm assuming everyone knows, what swing is. It's just going to add some groove essentially to everything. Right, little groovy there, or just straight. We also have a gate, which I don't think you're going to hear much on these drums, but you will hear it once we get to the melodic here in just a second. And then we have accent. So if you have accented notes, that will increase it or decrease that accent. Right here is your step input. So what do you say we just create a new variation right here? Name it drums 4, for example. And we'll start on slot number 1. And then we can use our MIDI keyboard to input or step record our different hits, okay? Now you can use a real MIDI keyboard or you can use your computer keyboard, and I've already shown in a different video how to set that up. So I'm just gonna turn that option on right here. Then I'll make sure I turn on our step recorder right there, and I'll press Q. That put a note in there for me right on my kick. So I press W. In this case, it's gonna be my snare. It goes from step to step. You can enter a rest to go to the next step there if you want, or of course, click it and you can input it that way. I'm not sure why exactly you would do this. In my opinion, it's just easier to, just enter things in with your pencil tool. But you can do that if you want. Also down here, you can notice we have a velocity, repeat, and probability. You can also get things like sustain, but it just needs to be activated on your keyboard first, or something like pitch bend. You can throw that in there as well. So let's go back to drums 1 here in this case, and let's look down here at the different curves that we can draw in. And now I can put in my velocity for each of these hits here. So make this one lower, make this one higher, this one lower. Maybe for the snare, make this one higher and this one lower. Okay, we can go to repeat. Now this gets really cool. Let me zoom in here a bit so you can really see what's going on here. I can also use my mouse wheel, by the way, to just scroll up or down to adjust that. Just pull these up real quick. Good enough for what we need. So over to repeat now in our kick lane. So right now, by default, everything is going to be on 0. Okay. So what happens if I increase, say this note right here, I increase this to 1. Let's pull this up to 1. Now look up here. See what happened? Let me pull it back down. On 0, it's just this hit. If I pull it up to 1, then we actually get 2 hits. If I pull it up to 2, we're getting 3 hits or 3 triggers of that, okay? So it's the hit plus whatever the repeat is. So in this case, it's 5. So let's hear that here. We'll put a repeat right here, say 2, which is going to be 3, as you can see right there. And we have 1 down here. So play that. Hear that? So this gets really cool, especially once you get into things like your hi-hats. Let me just grab my hi-hat and just pop in a pattern real quick. Play that back. Okay, let's add in some repeats now. Let's go to our snare. Right? So just imagine how creative you could be with that. Then we have probability. Let's turn the repeats off on these. By the way, you'll notice the numbers right there on our actual, on the actual notes right in there. You can see the numbers there as well if you need to. So probability, by default, all of this is going to be on 100. And probability is just what's the probability that it's actually going to play back. So let's leave this one on 100. We'll pull this down to around 50, pull this down to around, 25-ish or so, and pull this way down to say 9%. And we'll have this one here on 100%. We'll just play that back. Didn't hear that hit on the kick. Didn't hear it there. Didn't hear it there. Right? You heard that 9. There we go. Now we got the 50. Got the 9 again. Okay, so probability is a way to put in some sort of like randomness into your different grooves that you program. And of course, sustain and pitch bend, you probably understand how that already works. Control Z out of that. But then it gets even cooler because we can come right here to our 3 dots and we can actually use automation in our step sequencer. Now, by the way, if you're not seeing this, okay, if you're not seeing that, just click this graph right here. That'll open it up. You can also hit the plus to add another lane. So you can see, say, velocity here, repeat here, probability right there, and so on and so forth, okay? Let's remove that lane because we don't need to see it. Let's come back to our 3 dots. And what we're going to do is let's go to bank A and say pad 1. And this refers to impact in this case. And let's find something like gain. And there's gain, and we'll just add that. Now we could add a bunch more stuff, but let's just add gain. And pull up impact XT, and now you can see that on this gain knob, there's a dot, okay? Linked to, in this case, kick 1. Okay? So what you can do is you can actually program in automation in a step-based way, which gets really crazy. Let's just solo just the kick here. And now on a step basis, I can change the gain curve of that just by drawing it in, of course, using my mouse wheel to adjust that. Let me adjust, say, this one here up here. Not too high though. Put this one way down here. Maybe put this one up here and this one down here. Just so we can kind of see what our gain knob actually does. If I just play back, it's obviously louder and then quieter. But if we see impact, you'll see that knob is being automated on a step basis. So that is really cool. Imagine being able to do that for your filters, resonance, and whatever other parameter that you want. Pretty cool. And we'll look at some other options that we have. We can click this icon right there. We can say show all. We can hide the unused. So all of my unused lanes are now hidden. We can show the default so we can see everything that we actually have available. In this case, in Impact XT, I can click my wrench and maybe I want to move my snare up here. I can do that. I can hide things. So say hide the rim. Now the rim is hidden there as well. So turn that wrench off. And now let's look at something else. Let's just put in a straight 4 here. Okay. I'm just going to do a kick. And that's it. So I'm actually going to drag with this. Let's just say right there. I'm going to change this one here back to drums 1. So there we go. This is just a straight 4, right? So what I'm going to do actually first, let me play this back again. Let's put in a snare hit, I think. Just do that there. Okay. So now I'm going to duplicate this. We call it drums 5. Okay. Drums 5. And now I'm going to get rid of the kicks. So drums 5 is just the snare. Come back to drums 4. I'm going to get rid of the snare, so it's just the kicks. Now I'll grab drums 5 and throw it up here. Now obviously you should know, what this is, right? That's just snare. That's just kick. But watch what we can do with patterns. I can take this pattern that is just snare and drop it right on top of our kick pattern. And now they play at the same time, right? That's pretty cool. So you could have a bunch of different kick patterns, a bunch of different snare patterns or hi-hat patterns in separate variations. And then you can layer those up however you want directly within this, which is pretty cool. I could also right click a pattern if I want, go to instrument parts, and I could convert that to a part. So convert pattern to part. So now we see our, in this case, the drum editor, but our more familiar MIDI roll that you might be used to in other DAWs. The cool thing about patterns is how you can just put them all around your sequence, a bunch of different variations that we already have here, right? If I don't like that there, I can change it to 2, right? If I don't like it here, I can change this one to 4, so on and so forth. And also, you don't have to keep all of your variations, all of your parts or patterns within one sort of master pattern, right? You might want to have a different pattern for a verse and a different pattern for a chorus, so on and so forth. So if we considered this pattern here, this drums pattern to be like a verse, we'll say, we can also insert a new pattern into the same track here. I can just right click in this case and just go ahead and say insert pattern, right? So now I have a new pattern. As you can see, if I click this pattern here, it contains all of my variations, whereas this pattern does not. So in this pattern, just real quickly, I'll just fill something in right there, okay? And then we'll just duplicate it here, and we'll just fill something in like that. Now, that's not going to sound good. Doesn't matter. We just need to see the variations here in this case. Okay, so this is going to be our chorus, just as an example. This is chorus 2. And again, our drums pattern is like our verse. Now understand that within my drums patterns here, on this drop down, I can only select the variations that are contained within this pattern. I can't select the variations from our new chorus pattern, okay? But in my chorus pattern, I can of course select my, in this case, 2 different variations on the fly, and the chorus, grab them here, throw them in, grab my drums patterns and throw them in here as well. I can even layer these on top of each other if I wanted to. Okay. And then of course, pull it off of there as well. Now, before we go on to the melodic part of this and the BFD3 part of this, what if you make a bunch of patterns that you want to reuse? Well, you can actually save your patterns and reuse them pretty easily here in Studio One. So let me grab a pattern that sounds okay. All right. Sounds pretty cool, right? Sounds all right. Let's fix this a little bit. I'm going to come to my gain and remove that. All right. So that pattern sounds okay to us. Drums 1. I can click it. I can right click. By the way, I can change my variation right here as well. But what I want here is come down here to event and go to export selection. We can do the same thing up here as well. We can export the selection, just select that. And now it's going to let me direct this to any location that I want. I can even put it in my, my sound sets library for Studio One if I wanted to. So I'll put it there. Let's call this drums 1. And down here, we have the option to save this as a music loop or a pattern. We'll do music loop first. We'll just click save. There we go. So that has been exported. Then we can browse for that wherever you happen to have, throw that. In this case, I put it in Studio One sound sets. So here's my music loop. Select it, and down here, you can see we can actually play this back. Right? Pretty cool. And I can take it and I can drag it in. I'll drag it into a brand new track. It's going to create that new track for me. And it also instantiated Impact XT. This is the Impact XT that we had loaded previously. It loaded a new version of it right here because it's connected to our music loop. Okay, so that's option number one, to save that as a music loop so you can share that wherever you want or reuse it and use the exact instrument with that with all of the correct settings without having to manually set that up. Other option would be, we'll just go here and go to export selection because it's in our recent items. If it's not, come to event and export selection. And this time we'll say a pattern and we'll call it drums pattern. And again, it's pattern. Save that to the same location. And now you can see that right here, we have drums dot pattern. Now put that back. I can hear it, but let me mute this and mute that. Now I play it back, you're not hearing anything. That's because if I drag this in, you'll see this doesn't actually connect to any virtual instrument right now, okay? As you can see, I can go ahead and connect it to an Impact XT if I want, or even BFD3, okay? But by default, it's not connected to a virtual instrument the same way our music loop was, okay? So you can save your patterns, recall them, drag them right in from your browser there in a pretty easy way. So if you go and you create a bunch of different patterns that you like or basic patterns and you want to reuse them over and over, make sure you save them, give them good names. You can of course create your own, your own folder for that, so they're easy to get back to, and then of course reuse them in different songs real easily just by opening up your browser here and dragging them right in. Okay, now let's look at using our patterns with, say, melodic content. So let's come to an instrument. We can grab any instrument that we want. What do you say we'll just grab? I guess we'll just grab Thorn here. Why not? So here we have Thorn, which is a synthesizer. Let me make sure all of this is muted. It is. Make sure this is soloed. Okay, we choose a good preset here. All right, so that works for us. Let's go ahead and insert a pattern. Vent, insert pattern, or Control-Shift-P. There's our pattern. Again, we can make it as long or short as we want. We'll just start with this. You can double click on it. Now we're in our pattern mode, and by default, it's giving us our piano roll or melodic mode. You can switch that over to the drum mode, though it doesn't make very much sense because we don't actually get the drum names because there's no drums. So we can also program in melodic mode. Now, obviously, this is different. If I just put a part in there, this is different from the standard piano roll here. Okay. Which we can, of course, program our notes in however you want there. Okay. But let's close out of that and get rid of our part and go back to our pattern. And we can do the same thing in here with our step sequencer. Let's come up here a bit. That's cool. Can even play back while we're doing this. So it's kind of cool. Let's change the gate now. Hear that now? It's really cutting off. Now it's sort of extended. Put this back on 100. So you have your melodic mode as well, and all of the basic same stuff still applies. We have your velocity, your repeat, your probability. Do a repeat on this note right there. Right? So try doing that with like a piano or something like that. Our gate, our accent, of course, the record, the step in there. Different steps, different resolutions, all the stuff we've already seen. And by the way, we can also, for these buttons here, if we're in this pattern, we can use our navigation here to sort of go through our timeline of our different patterns that we have. We can use our drop down here to switch patterns as well if you want. Again, same stuff here. Add a plus for a completely empty pattern. Draw on whatever you want. And of course, duplicate that pattern and make different changes to that variation. And of course, then you can find those all right here, all in here, or of course in this list, and of course drag those in by the name, bada bing, and of course save those as well, just as we did our drums. Now we'll come here to BFD3. So we can do the same thing with any drum program, whether it's BFD3 or Superior Drummer. Now, of course, BFD3 and Superior Drummer do, of course, have a built-in groove editor. But if you prefer to program in your DAW, you can do that very easily thanks to the pattern editor in Studio One, and also thanks to the drum mode here in Studio One as well. If I just create a part real quick there, just by double-clicking, right, a MIDI part. Then we can head in here, and as you can see, this is really cool. In other DAWs, it just gives you a piano roll, and you can't see the names of any of the different drums, right? You have no idea essentially what anything is. Well, in Studio One, with our part and our drum editor, we can actually see every different articulation right there, Of course, program that in as you want. Velocity and all that good stuff. But again, this is our part editor, our drum editor, and not our pattern editor. So let's actually get rid of that. And we'll go ahead and insert a pattern just to show that this does indeed work with other drum instruments as well. So same thing essentially here as our drum editor. We can see our kick, our snare, we can press our wrench, and we can change how these are oriented. So if I want my snare hit up here, I can do that. If I want the drag up here, I can do that as well. I can do the same thing here in show all. I can hide the unused. You can show the default, so on and so forth. And of course, program just as we did previously with impact. Cool. Make sure this velocity is up, 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 and up. Right? Do your repeats and all that good stuff on our snare hit. Pull that up to 3 if you want. Right? So you can do all that stuff. You can do drum rolls that way by increasing your repeats there. Of course, your probability, your velocity, and of course, program in whatever you want there. And if we look here real quick in BFD3, we can see here on the key map how I personally have everything laid out for this preset. And that, of course, is reflected over here in Studio One. If you're doing something like metal and you have a basic, taka, 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 taka with your kicks, you might as well say that as a pattern so you never have to make that again, because we can always just change the tempo, and that taka, 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 that double bass is going to be, it's going to be exactly the same. I could go 120. Of course, it's going to adjust force there, but we have the same pattern, of course, right? 200. Right? So just save those patterns. Check out the pattern editor, a great way to program your beats, program your drums, and even program some like arpeggios and things like that if you want to use a synth or a piano or any sort of other virtual instrument. So that is your patterns, your pattern editor here in Studio One.